Mixed lighting would mean, let's say you're in a room and you've got a big window over here and then a nice bright tungsten lamp over here. And so what it ends up looking like is really, really yellow this side of the face, really, really blue this side of the face, because daylight is blue and tungsten is yellow. And that does not look nice on skin tones. And it's a huge pain. And as I said, there are ways to fix it in post, but we would like to be awesome photographers and not have to fix it in post. So let's talk about some of the options you have here. First and foremost, if you can avoid it at all costs, do. Like if you have the ability to wow, there's really bright windows, like let's say it's an event, really, really huge bank of windows, and there's overhead tungsten lights, but they're not contributing anything. If you can go sneak and turn them off and not get yelled at by the event coordinator, do it. It's gonna make your job easier. Really, if it's not contributing, I barely notice. So that used to be my trick. So try to avoid it at all costs. If you can't avoid it, basically what you have to do is you gotta pick one. Am I gonna white balance for the windows, or am I going to white balance for the tungsten lights? And then you add a strobe to overpower the one you don't like. So that's what I do. I walk into a scene, I look at it and say, okay, can I turn off the overhead tungstens? No. All right. Looks like they're pretty strong. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to balance for the tungsten in my camera, my white balance preset, and I'm going to try to overpower the window light. Try to get everything the same color. So let's take a look at what that might look like. This is an image in a series that I shot with Eric Valland. We taught a class called Conquering Crappy Lighting. So, and that's what he was talking about, the poopy lighting in the beginning. If you missed that, that was funny. So I walk into the scene, and over here is a big window. So this is all blue light. And then over here in the back is a very pretty lamp. And it is very, very yellow. So if you look at her face, it is blue and yellow and definitely not flattering. It's definitely not what I want her skin tone to look like. So I know for sure the way that I want to go is going to be to pick one. So let's say I can't turn off the overhead lights. All I did, she's just facing the window. Okay, so just pretend that doesn't exist. She's just facing the window, and I'm lighting this way. I know. This is what happens at 4 a.m. Okay. No, I'm going to get yelled at. So she's facing the window, and the camera's shooting her that way. So yeah, if you look, she definitely has yellow on her hair, and it's definitely yellow in the background, but her skin looks good, and that's all we care about, because this is a skin class. So you can go that way. All right. But let's say that I don't have a choice. It's a bridal party. They're sitting at the head table, and there's a window on the left and tungsten on the right, and there is nothing I can do about it. So what do you want to do? So unavoidable mixed light, as you have here, you're going to choose a white balance and match your strobe. So what I could do in that scene is I could go ahead, and you saw how she was blue on this side and yellow on the other. I could go ahead and say, you know what? I'm going to daylight balance. I set my camera, my white balance to daylight. I'm going to take my strobe and just try to overpower that tungsten. Whatever my strobe isn't reaching, like in the background, it's still going to be yellow. But I'm going to try to overpower as much as possible, and the only thing that's really important to me is overpowering that yellow on her face, on her skin. So I could do that. Or if the tungsten is really, really bright and that's what's dominant, maybe there's only a little bit of window light coming through, set my white balance to tungsten for the light in that room. I'll take my flash and make it tungsten. Because you have a problem if you don't. What ends up happening is if I go ahead and I say, okay, I can't, this is for balancing for the room. Okay, let's say that window light was very weak. So I said, okay, I want to balance for tungsten. Okay, I want to make sure that this light in the background isn't yellow. I want to make sure this side of her face is correct. So I set it at tungsten, but then I just pull out my flash and take a picture. She's going to be insanely blue because our flashes are daylight balanced. So it seems really counterintuitive, like it seems opposite of what you want to do, but you actually need to make your flash yellow. Because since you've set it, well, it's not yellow, it's orange, but same thing. Since you've set your white balance to tungsten, you're getting rid of or neutralizing the tungsten on her face and on the background, And then you've got to make your strobe appear tungsten so that it is neutral too. Basically, by switching your white balance preset to tungsten, you're just saying neutralize anything that's yellow-orange. That's what it's doing. And so it's going to just look crazy blue if you don't. So really the solution in the end is this. You pick, I wanted to go ahead and set it to tungsten because I have really strong tungsten light in the background. And then I've got to overpower that window, so I'm going to grab a flash, and I'm going to gel it with something called color temperature orange. It's a little orange gel I put on the front. Now that light matches the background light. I'm set to tungsten, and now the skin looks nice. So if you can do that, pick what you're going to overpower, set your white balance to whatever you choose, and match your strobe. That's the easiest way to try to get over mixed lighting situations. So let me borrow that. What I use for events is this. And these are called Rogue gels. And they make them for speed lights. This is also made by Expo Imaging. And so they have these little gels. And this is one full stop color temperature orange, which is usually what you were going to use to overpower or to match the tungsten lights. So I'm going to match the tungsten lights with this. And there's a bunch of other colors. So let's say that I went and I was in a fluorescent room. And there was fluorescent, and she's like nasty green on the side of her face. And then over here, she has daylight. And I said, okay, well, I want to neutralize that green. I don't want the whole background to look green, so I'm going to set my preset. I'm going to set it to fluorescent. But then I throw in my flash, and it will look magenta. That's how it works. It's going to appear the opposite. So I've got to gel my flash to match what I white balanced for. I white balanced for the fluorescent in the room. So you make your flash green, which sounds weird. It sounds like the opposite of what you want to do. But since you're using a preset, it's going to neutralize it anyway. So these are the ones that I use. Pretty simple, pretty inexpensive. And this would be my recommendation. Another thing that you can also consider is if you do not have anything, like you don't have a flash to overpower the scene, and so you've got mixed light and you're stuck with it. You have a couple things that can kind of help you out. So one of them that I've used in the past, it's called a spider cube. Okay, try to hold it still. And this thing is actually really cool. It's just like your gray card, but like super on steroids. Okay, it's really cool. Because what you've got is you've got a lot of different things here. You've got your neutral points. This is actually for specular highlights, because when you're trying to set your exposure, when you're judging, you don't actually care if specular highlights, like really bright highlights, are white. They're supposed to be. What you don't want is white to become overexposed. So this is for in post. You can shoot this and gauge that. Here's your neutral point. And then in here, it's called a black trap. So that will be true solid black, because light can't get in there. But what's nice about this is if you hold it out in the scene, I can get the white balances for both sides. So if anyone has ever used smart filters or double processing, I can take a picture of this, white balance once for this side, white balance once for the other, and combine them. If you had no choice, this would be the option that I would go for. And it's got another one of those threads on the bottom, so if you wanted to unlike a little thing and stick it out in the scene, you could do that. And it also can mount to the top of their spider color checker, their spider checker. It can mount on the top of that, so you could do both of them at once. Okay, now, barring that doesn't work, or that you don't have one of those, which I think they're pretty cool. If that doesn't work, if you do have an Expo disc, you can, if it's like there's window over here and there's like a little bit of tungsten getting in and it's a little bit mixed and it's no preset's going to work and it just looks messy, you can use an Expo disc and just hold it where the subject is and just try to capture the light of the scene. It'll help get closer. Mixed light is still not going to be pretty, but it's going to be improved for your skin tones. So that would be the process that I would walk through. Pick a white balance, overpower the light that I don't like by gelling my flash to match where I set my white balance for. Use a color checker or one of those spider cubes. And then after that, if I don't have, also use an Expo disc. So, questions?
I just want to let the people at home, there's been quite a few questions about how do we do this outside, where do we point this outside, so I just want to remind everybody that we will be having an entire segment shooting outdoors, and we'll be covering all this then.
Yeah.
Take it? Okay, cool.
And what I'll also say is if you have the, if you put the camera kind of right where the subject's face is and shoot it out at the scene, it's built to catch the light of the scene. The thing you would want to watch out for outdoors is if for some reason you had a drastic difference of white balance from one side to the other, like sun's on this side and shades on the other, you would want to hold it right in the middle. So you'd actually stand in front of your subject so that you can catch everything. And that would be how you might use an expo disc. You're kind of making sure that you are capturing all light hitting your subject. And that's what it's made for.
Just one more question. Yeah. A great question here from Nevi. If you had only one white balance helper, which one would it be?
I'm a fan of the color checker. I usually bring it out a lot. Because I'm a fashion photographer, the color accuracy is more important to me. So either. I think a lot of people find the expo disc easy as well because you don't necessarily have to get it out in the scene, but at least just shoot from the angle of where your subject is. But I would do color checker if I had to choose. Yeah. Okay. Number 3 is color contamination. This is, I know, a huge one that people don't see. You don't realize. So this is something you have to train yourself to be familiar with. What colors are messing up your scene? And unfortunately, there are many things to do this. How many people have photographed a family in a park and they are bright green, the whole family, because it is being color contaminated by the light bouncing off the green grass, and they look sickly and not good. So let's talk about color contamination. This is a huge one that I had to figure out on my own, and honestly, I didn't really figure it out until recently. So let's talk about this. So unwanted color. What I want you to do is I want wherever your environment is, wherever you are shooting, to look around and look beyond the obvious. Everybody goes on location, sticks their subject under the tree, and says, okay, well, my light source is the sun, but they're in the shade, so it's shade white balance. Not quite. Especially when you have that situation where the sun is bouncing off the green grass is bouncing onto your subjects, and now they're green. So what I want you to do is go to whatever environment you're in and try to figure out actually what the light source is. It might be the open sky, it might be the green grass, there might be light bouncing off of a red wall. There might, like, one funny one is somebody had me look at one of their images, and it was this girl in a swimsuit. And I said, was there a gigantic blue pool cover next to her on her left? How did you know that? Because she had a giant blue highlight up her body because the sun was hitting that blue pool cover and bouncing back and hitting the side of her body, which is not, blue is not really attractive swimsuit color, skin tone. So you want to look at those things. The other things that can cause problem with color contamination is clothing, either the subjects or their assistants. So you've probably seen instances where someone has, for example, a bright pink or bright purple top on, really bright purple, and all of a sudden they have a nice purple glow underneath their chin. So let's take a look at these and what you can do. All right, so I told you analyze the scene. So let's start with the reflective grass. The problem is the green and yellow tones in the face. Okay, so it's not actually super easy, which is probably why a lot of you have a problem with it. One thing you can do is move them. And what I mean by that is you're like, wait, okay, so I have my subjects in the shade. Let's say they're in the shade of a tree, and you're standing in the sun, and maybe like 4 feet from them is where the shade line ends, and then the sun hits the grass. Because of that, the light source on their face is actually just all that light 4 feet away bouncing off the green grass. So if you could put them deeper in shade, that's going to help a little bit. But another one that I would often do is I would put them, like, I won't put this in my photo, but I would put my subjects in the shade. I have all the beautiful green in the background, but But right where I'm standing is a nice neutral colored sidewalk. I don't need to include it in my frame. Like I can use a parking lot. I can use whatever, concrete. And so if I have that where the light is bouncing instead of a giant green field, it doesn't need to be in my frame, but now I have a nice glowing white light source instead. So if you can take a look and position them where the light's not going to be bouncing off that bright green, that's one way to get around it. Okay, a little bit more complicated way to get around it without Photoshop, because talk about that. But the other way to get around it is you do have to overpower that green light. But it doesn't mean you have to blast your subjects with strobes. And it doesn't mean you have to use a reflector really strong. You just need to add more neutral light to their faces to try to cancel some of that out. So I have a couple images that show this. And actually, one of them is from a workshop that I just did. So looking at the image here, where she is in this scene is actually, we're photographing her. This is a workshop I just did in Sweden. And so if you look, see the shade line right there? She's in the shade, but her light source is all of the sun bouncing off this grass and hitting her. And she's got a little bit from the side over here. This is from the open sky. This is not from sun. This is, it's an opening in the trees. So this is actually nice and correctly color toned because it's just open shade. But on this side of her face is all of that green reflection, greenish yellow from the grass. So if I could move her in the shade and maybe over on this side, there's a sidewalk. If I could move her over there and stand her near the sidewalk, it's going to help me because then I won't have that green reflecting. But another option, and let me just zoom in one more time so you can see, okay, this is going to be green, this is going to be neutral. But another option is to pop in a little bit of light. And this is where people go overboard, is they think, okay, I'm going to be using strobe on location, so I need to go, 2 stops above ambient and make the background no, just because you're using strobe on location doesn't mean it needs to look like a flash shot. I don't think that this looks like a flash photograph. Doesn't look like strobe was used in this image, to me at least. But all I'm trying to do is just overpower some of this green, some of this yellow, by kicking in just a little bit of light. So you could do this with an off-camera flash. Creative Live has lots of classes on speed lights and off-camera flash. You could also do this with a studio strobe on location if that's what you're more comfortable with. Or you could also try to do this with a reflector. I tend to lean more towards the reflector route. That's kind of how I like to work. So let me show you another example, kind of same idea. Oh, and in this picture, I have the new ProPhoto B1. It's just bare bulb turned way down, and I'm just kicking in just a little bit of light on her face just to get rid of some of that green and some of that yellow. And it also improves a little bit more of the contrast. It looked a little muddy. She didn't have many catch lights in her eyes because the light was coming from below and to the side. So it actually improves the quality of light. Okay, but you can also do this, as I said, with a reflector. So this is my friend Sarah, and I'm photographing her, and she's standing in the middle of a field. The sun's hitting the back of her head, and there is giant green grass everywhere. So the only light on her face is going to be the light reflecting off the grass and from the open sky. The open sky, like I'm talking about not sun on her face, is blue, like the sky's blue. It's gonna be cool on her face. And then yellow and green in the shadow areas where it's filled in. If you are a black and white photographer, no problem. But most of our clients at least want to see what it looks like in color. Yeah, I totally used to shoot black and white. But like, oh yeah, this one is a black and white image because it's more emotional. Because I messed up the white balance really bad. But now I don't have to do that. So in this scene, what I want to do is I want to overpower this green and this yellow, and I want to pop some light in. And so I'm going to do that with a reflector. When I'm using reflectors on location, one of the things you want to be really, really careful of is how you use the reflector. A lot of times you get, I don't want to call them lazy, but not as intuitive assistants as you want. And they're holding the reflector here. And what happens is that's going to give her bottom light. It's going to light her nose, it's going to light underneath her chin and her jawline. So you want that reflector to at least be even with her head, or actually, honestly, even above her head. Because that direction of light is what carves out the cheekbones and carves out the jawline. And that's what we have here. And this is why she has this nice jawline here. And you can see the reflector is about even and a little bit higher than her head by the catch light. But this is a drastic, drastic improvement from the previous image, which had all that green in the shadows. All we've done is pop in a silver reflector. So for those of you that wanted an easy solution, maybe this is, or maybe it's not. But keep that in mind. This is a major source of color contamination. On location, I use silver and white reflectors. I never use gold. I'll put that out there. I don't know if I don't ever use gold. I will very seldom use a silver gold mix, and that's particularly with a little bit of warmer skin tones or darker skin tones. Sometimes the shadows and darker skin tones go a little cool, and so I might pop in a little bit there. So I'm going to hold that real quick. I'll show you. Perfect. So I know this is blatant. Oh, as I said, no gold. Don't look at this. It's cool. Okay, so don't do this. Try either here or something here. And what I recommend you check out is Westcott makes stands that have grips for their reflectors. And I usually use those, but the big thing to think about is they need a sandbag if it's windy, or a voice-activated light stand assistant. That's a good one. See, this is my voice. Thank you. He's a voice-activated light stand. Excellent. Okay, let's keep moving on. All right, so reflective environments, but it's not just the grass that's going to be a problem. It's anything, and I see people make a mistake about this all the time. So here's an instance of this being a problem. This side of her face is super duper red and pink. Because when I was shooting her, she's standing next to a red and pink wall. That's not what's hitting her face, but there is enough light bouncing around that it's going to give me color contamination. So all I had her do is take 5 steps forward and that problem is gone. I'm just making sure that that red wall is not reflecting on that side of her face. So just try to analyze your scene. I think that's the biggest thing that I would recommend, is take a look, where is there a color problem? Like if you have a girl posing in the middle of a street and there's a bright blue car, that bright blue car is definitely influencing your shot. I have no doubt of it in the middle of the day. So take a look at that. But it gets a little bit more complicated. Let's take a look at a couple other things. Reflective clothing. And I don't even mean reflective. It's not like they're wearing space suits. I mean, I'm talking about bright colored clothing. If somebody has a bright red or a bright pink shirt, it will cause some damage to the skin tones, and we can see that pretty blatantly. But the big one that people forget is your assistants. I have a rule on my sets. Okay, I'm a fashion photographer, so I can make rules on my sets. It's nice. But the rule is all my assistants have to be wearing black at all times, always. Because with him standing here, holding this reflector, this entire side of her face is pink. Pinkish, what is salmon or whatever. But it's more than that. If he's wearing a light gray shirt, maybe a whitish gray shirt, it's still going to influence the image because it's going to bounce, the light's going to bounce off of him and fill in those shadows. The only thing I can have my assistants wear that isn't affecting my actual image and actual skin tones is solid black. So everybody has to wear solid black, which is really funny. I had an intern, Jenna Martin. Hi, Jenna. She was assisting me, and I told her this rule, and she's not from New York, so she's like, I only have 2 black outfits. So I don't know, either she was dirty a lot or she bought more. I'm not sure. So anyway, so the assistant makes a difference. Let's take a look here. So here's the difference. Him in a black shirt, him in that pinkish crazy color shirt. And yes, of course, I picked this color because it illustrates the point, but you don't have to be that crazy. How about him in blue? That's a regular color that people would wear. You definitely can see that blue in the shadows. That lighter color fills it in. So that is something you definitely want to watch out for, which is one of the reasons as well, if I'm photographing family and group portraits, one of the reasons you want them to wear maybe more subdued or more subtle skin tones is if you're photographing outdoors, they're going to be reflecting on each other. So the little kid standing next to dad in the bright red shirt is going to have a bright red face. So I try to keep people in more neutral tones. Doesn't mean you have to do gray or all white, but just not really bright colors. Okay, so going on from this as well is looking at her shirt. Here's when she's wearing a black shirt. When she switches color, watch her chin. It's going to reflect. How do you fix this? Okay, so you can't really totally fix it. But when we were talking about lighting on location, we were talking about all the green grass. What we can do is we can overpower that green. So in the studio, what you could do is you could add a reflector underneath her chin, and some of that neutral light is going to overpower the pink. But what happens if I didn't want a reflector underneath her chin? Maybe that's not the type of light that I wanted. Your angle of light does make a difference. The fact that I have the light at a higher angle, it bounces off her shirt and back up to her face. So I could lower the angle of the light. But now I'm changing the angle of my light, which means they just can't wear crazy colors. I mean, so you know what I'm saying. You either have to add a reflector to try to overpower it, change the angle of your lights, or you can definitely fix that in post. The color is easier to fix than the fact that it's making this area lighter. We're making that area lighter, and that's going to be a little bit more challenging to darken down. I can pretty easily select that pink and pull that out or change the color of that. So watch out for these type of color contaminations. And the last kind of one that people really overlook is unwanted ambient light. And I absolutely had this problem in my first studio. All right, so my very first studio was, I think it was like 10 and a half or 12 feet wide by 17 feet deep and 8.5-foot ceilings with fluorescent lights. And so I would take more dramatically lit images of men, and I never, ever understood why their skin always looked green. Because what I was doing is I was shooting in a way that actually that fluorescent light in the ceiling was showing up in my strobe lit pictures, even though I didn't intend it to. And this can happen. You don't have to be shooting really high ISOs and really long shutter speeds for this to happen. So let me explain what this means and how this affects your image. One way to avoid this, I'm going to give you the setup, is when you're shooting in the studio and you do not want color contamination from your overhead lights or your windows, you're going to want to shoot at or near your sync speed. So all of our cameras have a maximum shutter speed where it can still talk to the strobes and work before you start seeing the curtains. For mine, for example, it's 1/200th of a second. I shoot a Canon 5D Mark III. Even at 1/200th of a second, I start to see like the corner of the shutter. So I usually shoot at 1/60th of a second. Another thing that you want to do is try to turn off the ambient light if you can. Go ahead and turn off the tungstens overhead or close the curtains from the windows. Try to get rid of anything that's going to be affecting the tones in your pictures. And then the next thing that you want to do is when you go to shoot, make sure you take off your trigger. You've got your camera all set to what you think your exposure is going to be for the studio strobe, and take a picture. You should see nothing. When you're shooting in the studio and you take a picture with your studio strobes and then you take that off, if you take a picture without the strobes and you still see that person, what it means is that the ambient light in the room is recording, whether it's the window or the tungsten or the fluorescence. And that color that's recording is messing up your skin tones. I have no doubt. And it's going to show up most predominantly in the shadows. But the shadows, it doesn't mean you have to have a dramatically lit picture. It can be the shadows under the chin or the shadows in their eye sockets. So my problem used to be is I would, even if it wasn't that dramatic, I'd have light on a subject's face and maybe they had deeper set eyes and they'd have like green in their eyes and green underneath their chin because the fluorescent light was registering there. So what I came to find out is I'd get my settings all right with my strobe, I'd take off that trigger, I'd take a picture and make sure no light was recording. So I'm going to show you what that actually looks like, how you might do a test like that. All right, so I made a really extreme example here, but it's not Like I actually put a tungsten hot light on this side. This is going to be, let's say that I had a lamp sitting there. But quite honestly, a big bank of windows is enough light to mess up your color for sure. So it's kind of just simulating another light source. All right, so this is my beauty dish. It's going to be the daylight strobe. Here's me shooting. I'm using the D1S03. All right. So I went ahead and I took the trigger off of my camera. And I shot at my sync speed, 1/200th of a second, f8 ISO 100. I am quite sure that many of you shoot in the studio at settings close to this, right? Like those aren't outrageous. It's not like I'm shooting a really long shutter speed or shooting wide open or really high ISO. And I can still see her, but it's not too bad. But what happens if I go to a 60th or a 30th? I can see a full, complete image. So when I go ahead and I turn my strobes back on, at a 200th of a second, maybe I can see a little bit. But with these strobes, when I have those longer shutter speeds, I absolutely see the color from the ambient light. For those of you who aren't familiar with mixing ambient and studio at the same time, your shutter speed determines how much ambient you see. The longer your shutter stays open, the more you're recording of the ambient light. A long shutter speed isn't going to affect your studio strobe if you're just trying to shoot studio. So that's why I recommend go ahead and shoot close to your sync speed and take a test image, because although this one is kind of orangish looking, mine was green. And this is definitely not an attractive undertone. And this even happens when you're not shooting at really, really long exposures or really high ISOs. So give that a test for sure. So let me take a look one more time. Here's at a 60th, which I was shooting at a 60th all the time. I had no idea. And 1/200th. Let's say, however, you're going ahead and you're like, well, I've tried to close the windows as much as possible. I'm shooting at my sync speed, and I can definitely still see that ambient light. What do? What you can do at that point is you start making sure you're at your sync speed. You want to close down your aperture more, because that'll darken everything too, but then your strobe's going to look darker, so you've got to turn up the power of your flash. So if you're seeing your ambient, turn your strobe up higher, basically. Just make it stronger, and that's going to help you out. Okay, so do we have any questions while we're at that?
Of course we do.
Okay, cool.
All right, so can we just kind of do some review, if you don't mind? Okay, so quite a few people were talking about, let me get their names for you. This is, let's see here. We have a question from Rio Song and from Lindsay, another Lindsay, talking about putting things on the ground in front of you. So when you talked about having the grass laid out, do you recommend like putting reflectors out in front of people on the ground? Is that something that you would do? Okay,
so I've actually tried this before, and it kind of works and it kind of doesn't. So let's say it's the grass situation again. If I can put a reflector out there, it's still going to be a light source that maybe I don't want. Particularly in a sunny day, what'll happen is if you have a silver reflector, the sun's going to hit it and it's going to give them bottom light. Now, what you could do is you could lay out a gigantic black tarp, but that's impractical for most people. So you could do it. Maybe you, like for example, I used to shoot the California Sun Bounce had a really large reflector, like a 4x6, and maybe I could set the white on the ground. But chances are there's still a lot of color contamination from the entire rest of the scene, so it won't completely get rid of the problem. Maybe for a close-up, if they're sitting right on the grass, right underneath them, that would work. If your reflector is maybe like a 5-in-1 and it has a black and you're not getting the ground, you could put it right in front of your subject. It'll help, but it won't fix it. So maybe not even worth the effort. I would recommend just giving it a try.
Okay, cool. I'm glad you tried it. And then a clarification question. This is from Jane Ames and David, who said that you had talked about not putting reflectors underneath people, but then in your slide you had an assistant that had them right here. So can we talk about that and clarify that?
Great question. Awesome. Okay, so perfect clarification. You never want your assistants to hold the reflector down here, except when it's fill light. So what I mean by that is when you're on location, what you're trying to do is actually shape the light on the face. Your reflector will be the main light, which is why you want the light from above. Same thing in the studio. You don't usually have your studio strobe down here. So it gives you monster light. Either it's roughly even with their face or a little bit higher. In the studio, the reason that reflector was below the chin is because it's just filling in the shadows. It's not the main light. The main light is definitely still that studio strobe, and then you're just trying to fill in the shadows a little bit. So if you went out on location and it was an overcast day, and all you're trying to do is just pop a little bit of catch light in someone's eyes, it might be okay to put a reflector under their chin. So my rule of thumb is when the reflector is the main source of illumination on your subject, then it's got to be above their head. If it's just kicking in a tiny bit of fill for catch lights or to fill in the shadows, then it's okay to go underneath, but you still want to pay attention. You want to make sure you're not getting dual highlights, like dual highlights under their chin. And one thing to be aware of is highlights underneath people's chins that are undesirable, like too bright, make people look heavier because it's drawing more attention to this area, and it makes their jaw look wider and the skin under their neck look wider, whether they have extra skin or not.
All right, Lindsay, so we've had quite a few people, including Frozen Photog, who are asking how to overpower like cedar walls and ceilings, or how to overpower their floor, and how much their floor is affecting their light. And we've kind of touched on all of these things, but sure. I mean, do you recommend that people paint their entire studio white and try to get the floor white, or what do we do for people that have studios built? Yeah,
no, this is an excellent question. And technically, the perfect studio should look like a really creepy dungeon. The perfect studio is actually supposed to be painted black or gray everywhere. It's really supposed to be painted black everywhere, because then the only light on your subject is light that you put there. Because let's say that your subject's sitting here and you go ahead and you have your strobe here, and you're lighting your subject, and you have a white wall right there, like 2 feet away. You're not going to get pure black shadows, because that light is going to bounce off the white wall and fill in the shadows on their face. Now, let's imagine that you have cedar walls, or brown, or whatever color. Now they're always going to have that tone in the shadow areas. So the perfect studio is painted black. Don't paint your studio black, it's really creepy. Instead, what most photographers use are something called V-flats or bookends. And they're large pieces of foam core. Usually they're 4 by 8 feet. And there's 2 of them taped together. On one side it's white, and on the other side it's black. So what you would do then in the immediate surroundings of your subject is you put up that black V-flat on either side, and it's going to help eat up that light and make sure it's not bouncing around whatever color is in your scene. If instead you want to fill in those shadows, you turn it around and use it for white. My studio in New York is all white. That is standard for rental studios. But then I bring out the black V-flats whenever I want to control the scene a little bit better. If you have a crazy color in whatever space you're shooting, just watch out for light spill. Like, watch out that the angle of your light isn't bouncing off that wall. Maybe you want to instead use grids. This isn't a conversation we're really getting into, but you can actually use grids in softboxes. And what grids do is they focus the light more. It prevents the light from spilling. There's grids for beauty dishes, there's grids for softboxes, there's grids for lots of lights. And so what it'll do is it'll make sure that you're not having light spilling on that colored wall and then bouncing back on your subject. Thank you, John. So this is a beauty dish grid. And what it'll do is if your subject is sitting here without the grid, the light's probably going to spill from the top of your subject's head down past their knees. I add the grid, and now it's maybe only from their waist to their head. So it's kind of controlling your light a little bit more. In crazy color situations, that's definitely what I would recommend. And then last but not least, if you don't have black V-flats, but you do have black muslin or black fabric, hang that from the walls as well. That would be fine. Thank you. Okay.
Okay, and one final question. Yeah. Mark L. wanted to know about using a gray card. Can we just touch on that again? People that only have a gray card.
Can I have the color checker again real quick? I have something to add on top of everything I've said. All right, perfect. Okay. So what you would do for using a gray card is have your subject hold it right in front of their face, as I am, And then what you're going to do is in Lightroom or Aperture or in Camera Raw, all of them would be fine. You use your white balance eyedropper and you select on this gray patch, and it's saying this should be neutral. It shouldn't have any color cast, and it'll switch your whole photo to make it be neutral. The thing I wanted to add to this is, let's say that you don't have an expo disc. There actually are ways that you can do custom white balances without one. I don't find it to be as accurate, but if you have a larger gray card and you hold it in front of your subject and you zoom way in and only fill your frame with that gray card, and the subject is holding it exactly in front of their face, you can actually set that as a custom white balance. It's not as accurate in my opinion, but if that's something that you wanted to try out, a lot of times it does actually improve the skin tone. Because it's the same thing. It's saying, okay, just like the expo disc, the grayish frame I'm giving you should be neutral. So make it neutral and create a custom white balance for this scene. And that's nice too, because you can also shoot it after the fact and neutralize it.